The alien flagship floated in the darkness of deep space. Its silver body shone against the stars like a silent guardian. Inside its wide halls, everything was usually calm. Soldiers walked with discipline, servants carried out their duties, and the great queen ruled with wisdom. But this night was not calm. Something unusual broke the stillness of the ship. A cry echoed again and again through the shining corridors. It was not a cry of war, not a cry of anger. It was the cry of a baby. The alien queen sat upon her throne of crystal, but she was not the ruler that everyone expected to see. She was a mother holding her newborn child. The baby's body glowed faintly, small wings of energy flickered at its back, yet the face showed the innocence of life just begun. The queen's eyes, usually filled with strength, were heavy with worry. She tried to soothe the child with gentle hums that her people had used for generations. These were sounds made not with the mouth but with the mind, soft waves of thought meant to bring peace. Yet the child did not stop crying. Advisors gathered around her, tall figures with long cloaks that shimmered in the light of the hall. Each one offered advice. One suggested placing the child in the healing chamber, where the energy of crystals might calm the body. Another suggested calling the wise singers, who could shape sound into harmony. A third offered a potion created from rare plants of their home world. But none of it worked. The baby cried without pause, its small hands moving in the air, its glowing eyes closed tight as if in fear. The queen stood and walked through the chamber, rocking her child close to her chest. She whispered words of comfort in her native tongue, promises of safety, promises of love. Yet the cries grew louder, echoing so strongly that even the guards outside the chamber could hear. For a queen who commanded fleets, who held the power to change the future of her people, this helplessness felt heavier than any war. She could face enemies, she could lead battles, but she could not calm her own child. As hours passed, the halls of the ship grew restless. Servants whispered in corners. Soldiers glanced at one another with unease. None had ever heard the royal heir's voice before, and now they heard nothing but endless wailing. Some felt fear, wondering if the cries were a sign of weakness in the new heir. Others felt sorrow for their queen, who had never looked so fragile. But none dared speak against her, for they loved her deeply and respected her burden. The queen finally ordered her advisors to search every record of their people. There had to be an answer somewhere, some ancient knowledge about a child who could not be soothed. Old scrolls were brought from the memory vaults. Holograms of ancient guardians appeared, telling stories from thousands of years past. But the stories spoke of great wars, of lost worlds, of leaders rising to power. None spoke of a crying child. The silence of history only made the present cries feel louder. In the quiet moment between the wails, the queen sat down again. She held her baby close, pressing her forehead against the small head glowing faintly in her arms. She whispered not as a ruler but as a mother, telling the child that it was loved, that it was the most precious being in the universe. For a heartbeat, she thought the cries softened, but then they returned, sharp and endless. Her heart tightened with helpless pain. The queen looked at her council with tired eyes. They bowed their heads, for they had no more answers. The halls of the ship, usually filled with songs of order, were now filled with the sound of sorrow. And though the queen was surrounded by her people, she felt alone in the struggle. She wondered if anyone, anywhere, held the key to this mystery. Her child was not only her treasure, but the hope of her people. And that hope would not stop crying. As the great ship drifted silently across the stars, the sound of the royal heir's voice carried through every corridor. It reached the guards at the gates, the workers in the engine rooms, even the prisoners kept in the lower chambers. None could escape it. The fate of the future echoed through that cry, and the queen knew in her heart that someone, perhaps someone most unexpected, would be the one to answer it. Far below the shining halls of the alien flagship, there was a place without beauty. The lower chambers were cold and dim, built not for honor but for control. Metal doors lined the walls, and behind one of them sat a human soldier named Daniel. He had been captured during a recent clash between the alien fleet and a small human patrol. The battle had been fierce, and though he fought bravely, his ship was lost. Now he was a prisoner, cut off from his people, locked inside a place that felt more like stone than metal. Daniel sat on the narrow bench, his back leaning against the wall. He was tired, but his spirit was not broken. His thoughts often returned to Earth, to the fields and forests where he grew up, and to his younger sister's children, who loved to climb onto his shoulders whenever he came home. These memories kept him strong, even in the silence of his cell. The aliens had not treated him with cruelty, but they gave him nothing more than food and water. Days passed without change, each one blending into the next like shadows in the same long night. Then one evening, the silence broke. Daniel lifted his head when he heard a faint sound echoing through the walls. At first, he thought it was a machine or some signal he did not understand. But as the sound continued, his eyes widened. It was a cry. Not a cry of pain or anger, but the cry of a baby. The sound was muffled by layers of walls, yet it carried something strange, something familiar. He leaned closer to the wall, listening, and the truth became clear. Somewhere above him, a child was crying without pause. The sound struck him in a way nothing else had since his capture. It reminded him of his sister's home, of nights when her youngest would cry until someone picked him up and rocked him to sleep. Daniel could almost hear his sister's tired voice calling for his help, just as she used to do. He remembered how he would sing softly, how he would bounce the baby gently in his arms until the cries turned to giggles. The memory warmed his heart, but it also filled him with questions. Why would an alien ship be filled with the cry of a child? The guards outside his chamber seemed restless that night. Daniel could hear their heavy footsteps pacing back and forth. Sometimes they stopped, as if listening, then moved again quickly. Once, he heard them speaking in their own language, their voices sharp and uncertain. Though Daniel could not understand their words, the tone told him enough. Even they did not know what to do. Whatever was happening, it was unusual even for them. The cries of the child were reaching everyone on the ship, even those who did not wish to hear. Daniel lay back on his bench, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the child's voice still filling his ears. He wondered if the aliens had never dealt with such a thing before. Perhaps their children did not cry as human children did. Perhaps their ways of care were different. But then, why did the cry sound so much like one of Earth's? The thought stayed with him long into the night. He had faced battles, he had endured capture, but this was something new. It was not danger that filled the ship, but sorrow. Hours passed, and still the sound did not end. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to rest, but the cry stirred something inside him. He felt a pull, a strange urge to help. Yet he was only a prisoner. His hands were bound by walls, his freedom taken by the queen who ruled this vessel. What could he possibly do? Still, deep inside, a thought whispered to him. Maybe fate had led him here for a reason. Maybe his capture was not the end of his story, but the beginning of something far greater. As the flagship drifted silently among the stars, Daniel sat in his cell, listening. He did not know that the sound which filled his heart with memory was the very same cry that filled the queen's heart with despair. Two lives, worlds apart, were about to cross paths in a way neither could have imagined. And though Daniel could not yet see it, the future of two species would change because a human soldier heard the cry of an alien child. The night on the alien flagship stretched long. Hours passed, yet the cries of the newborn heir did not fade. The sound reached every corner of the ship, touching soldiers, servants, and even the distant engine workers. No one could remember such a thing ever happening in their history. The alien queen, who had faced countless battles and carried the weight of her people, now sat upon her throne with weary eyes. Her child rested in her arms, still crying with a voice that cut through her heart like nothing else ever had. The queen had always been a figure of power. Her words could command fleets, her gaze could silence a crowd, and her decisions shaped the destiny of her entire race. Yet here she was, powerless against the cries of one small life. Advisors gathered around her throne, each offering solutions, but none had brought relief. The healing chambers filled with crystal energy had failed. The wise singers had poured their voices into the air, but the baby only cried louder. Even the rare elixirs drawn from the gardens of their home world had no effect. Every attempt ended in failure. One of the advisors, a tall figure with silver patterns across his skin, bowed low before speaking. He suggested that perhaps the child was not in need of comfort but of strength, that the baby's cries were a test of endurance. The queen shook her head gently. She could feel in her heart that the cries were not a sign of strength. They were cries of need, cries for something her people could not provide. Another advisor argued that the child might be marked by destiny, touched by forces beyond their understanding. But the queen dismissed the thought. She did not wish to place her child into the weight of prophecy. She only wanted peace for the little one. As the council argued softly among themselves, an elder advisor, older than all the rest, rose with a trembling voice. His steps were slow, but his eyes still held the light of wisdom. He reminded the queen of an ancient story passed through generations. It was a tale not of warriors, but of wanderers who once crossed the stars. According to the tale, there were times when outsiders held answers the people themselves could not find. Outsiders saw the world differently. Outsiders could sometimes do what no native could. The elder suggested that maybe, just maybe, the solution to the royal heir's cries did not lie within their own people. The council grew silent at these words. Some frowned, others looked uneasy. The idea of turning to an outsider was strange, even dangerous. The queen's people valued strength and wisdom within their own race. To rely on someone beyond their kind felt like weakness to many of them. But the queen did not dismiss the elder's suggestion. She sat quietly, holding her child close, feeling the weight of the cries. Her mind turned over the words again and again. Outsiders might see what they could not. Outsiders might bring an answer they had overlooked. Her thoughts drifted to the human prisoner locked below the shining halls. He was not a warrior of great rank. He was a captured soldier, taken from a skirmish with their fleet. Yet he had survived battle, endured captivity, and carried himself with quiet strength. She remembered reports that he did not lash out in anger, that he remained calm even in chains. A strange being, so different from her people, and yet he lived with a resilience that intrigued her. Could such a one hold an answer? The thought felt foolish, but desperation often opened doors to unlikely paths. The baby cried again, louder than before, and the queen felt her resolve harden. Pride could not silence her child. Tradition could not bring peace to the heir. She could not allow fear of judgment to outweigh the needs of her newborn. She rose from the throne, her robes flowing like rivers of light, and declared to her council that she would consider the elders' words. The room filled with whispers. Some were shocked, some were worried, but none dared challenge her decision. She was their queen, and her will was law. In that moment, the queen understood something new. To be a mother was not the same as being a ruler. A ruler thought of power, of politics, of reputation. But a mother thought only of her child. And if her child's peace could only be found in the hands of an outsider, then she would take that path, no matter how strange it seemed. The queen looked down at her baby's glowing face and whispered a vow. She would do whatever it took, even if it meant trusting a human prisoner. For in the soft cries of her child, she heard not only sorrow, but the future of two worlds waiting to be rewritten. The guards moved quickly through the lower halls of the flagship. Their steps echoed against the cold walls as they approached the chamber where Daniel was kept. The human soldier looked up when the heavy doors opened. He expected more rations or another routine check, but what he saw was different. The guards were tense, their eyes fixed not on him but on the message they carried. One of them spoke in a firm voice, ordering Daniel to stand. Chains of light were placed around his wrists, and he was told he was to be taken before the queen herself. Daniel was surprised. Since his capture, no one of high rank had spoken to him. He had been left in silence, a forgotten prisoner. Now, suddenly, the queen wanted to see him. He tried to guess why, but no answer came. He followed the guards through long corridors, passing soldiers and servants who glanced at him with mixed expressions. Some looked curious, others uneasy, as though they could not believe a human was being brought to the throne chamber. The great doors opened, and Daniel stepped into a hall unlike anything he had seen before. Tall crystal pillars reached toward the ceiling, glowing with soft colors. At the center sat the alien queen, her robes flowing like rivers of starlight. In her arms, she held her newborn child, whose cries still filled the air. The sound echoed across the chamber, yet no one dared move until the queen gave her command. The guards brought Daniel forward and then stepped aside. He stood alone before the throne, a soldier far from home, facing a ruler of a people he did not understand. The queen studied him carefully, her eyes sharp yet filled with weariness. She spoke, her voice carrying both strength and sorrow. She explained the truth. The heir of her people, the future of her race, would not stop crying. Every healer, every advisor, every method known to them had failed. Her people were losing hope, and she herself was losing strength. She had been told of an ancient tale that sometimes answers came from outsiders. So now, against every tradition, she turned to him. Daniel listened in silence, unsure if he had heard correctly. The queen of an entire civilization was asking for his help with her child. He had been ready for questions about war, about Earth, about human strategies. He had not been ready for this. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes drifted to the baby in her arms, and the sound of the crying stirred old memories again. He remembered holding his sister's youngest late at night when no one else could bring calm. He remembered humming a tune his mother used to sing, rocking the child until peace returned. Those moments had felt simple back then, yet they carried weight now. The queen noticed his hesitation. Her voice softened, though it carried the same authority. She told him she had no pride left in this matter. She was not asking as a ruler but as a mother. If he could do something, anything, she would allow it. Her people might not understand, but her child's peace mattered more than their judgment. Daniel felt the weight of her words. He was only a soldier, not a healer, not a leader, and certainly not someone who imagined being trusted by an alien queen. Yet he could see her exhaustion, the tired lines upon her face, the way her arms clutched the child as though her entire world might slip away. He understood that behind her power, she was simply a mother in need. He took a slow breath and nodded. He said he would try. He could not promise success, but he would give his best. The queen's eyes softened, and for the first time, a faint hope returned to her face. She rose from her throne and stepped forward, the chamber holding its breath as she moved. Every advisor and guard watched in silence as the queen placed the royal heir into the hands of a human prisoner. The baby's cries continued, loud and restless, but Daniel held the child carefully, as if he had done so many times before. The moment was fragile, filled with both doubt and wonder. None could predict what would happen next, but all understood that something extraordinary was beginning. The fate of the child, and perhaps of two worlds, now rested in the hands of a human soldier who had never expected to be more than a prisoner. The chamber was silent except for the cries of the newborn heir. Daniel held the baby carefully in his arms, the way he had once held his sister's children back on Earth. The weight felt both strange and familiar. The child's small body gave off a faint glow, and tiny flickers of energy shimmered near its skin. To any other soldier, this might have been frightening, but to Daniel it was simply a child. He adjusted his grip, supporting the head with one hand, cradling the body with the other. The alien advisors watched with wide eyes. None of them had ever seen a human hold their royal heir. To them, it looked unnatural, almost reckless. Yet the queen stood quietly, her gaze locked on Daniel, her heart caught between hope and fear. She had placed her most precious treasure in the arms of a prisoner, and she did not know what would follow. Daniel did not rush. He remembered the nights on Earth when his sister's youngest would cry without pause. He had learned then that calm could not be forced. It had to be given slowly, like a gift. He began to rock the child gently, moving in a rhythm that felt natural to him. At the same time, he hummed a tune. It was not a song of war or glory, not a song of power or command. It was a simple lullaby, a melody his mother used to sing when he was a boy. The notes were soft and low, carrying no meaning in words, only comfort in sound. At first, the baby's cries continued. The advisors exchanged doubtful looks, whispering to one another. Some believed this was a waste of time, others thought it dangerous. But Daniel kept rocking, his voice steady, his movements calm. Slowly, something began to change. The cries grew weaker, turning into small hiccups. The child opened glowing eyes for the first time since he had entered the chamber. Those eyes, filled with light, fixed themselves on Daniel's face. The room fell still. The baby's cries faded into soft whimpers, and then, at last, silence. Daniel smiled gently, his humming slowing as the child relaxed in his arms. The baby's small hand reached upward, brushing against his chin. For a moment, it was as though nothing else in the universe existed but the bond between the soldier and the child. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Advisors who had doubted now stared in disbelief. Guards who had once seen Daniel only as a prisoner now looked at him with something close to awe. The queen stepped closer, her heart racing as she saw her child finally at peace. Tears touched the corners of her eyes, not of sorrow but of relief. She had waited so long for this moment, and it had come not from her people, not from ancient wisdom, but from a human's touch. Daniel looked up at the queen. He just needed comfort, he said softly, his voice carrying across the silent hall. Children are the same everywhere. They need warmth, care, and patience. His words were simple, but they carried a truth that none of the aliens could deny. The queen bowed her head slightly, a rare gesture from a ruler who had never bowed before. "You have done what none of us could," she said. "You have brought peace to my child." Daniel shook his head. "I only did what anyone would do. I cared for him the way I would for my own family." The queen studied him closely, hearing sincerity in his voice. Her advisors remained uncertain, but none dared interrupt. What they had witnessed was beyond argument. The royal heir, who had cried without end since birth, was now calm in the arms of a human soldier. As Daniel continued to hold the child, a strange thought came to the queen's mind. Perhaps this was more than chance. Perhaps fate had guided events so that the human would be here in this moment. For the first time, she felt that the future of her people might not rest only in their own traditions but in the lessons of others. The chamber that had once been filled with cries now felt lighter, warmer. Every being present sensed that something important had happened. A bridge had been formed, not through treaties or battles, but through the simple act of one human soldier comforting a child. The queen's heart softened, and she knew the course of her people was about to change. Daniel, unaware of the depth of what he had begun, only smiled as the baby drifted toward sleep in his arms. To him, it was not about history or destiny. It was simply about doing what was right. Yet to the queen and her council, it was the beginning of a story that would echo through generations. The flagship had never known such silence. For days, the cries of the royal heir had echoed across every hall, keeping soldiers and servants awake, filling hearts with worry. Now the silence was gentle, like a long-awaited breath of peace. The newborn rested calmly in Daniel's arms, eyes half closed, tiny hand gripping his finger. The simple sight amazed everyone present. No healer, no advisor, no tradition had brought this calm. A human prisoner had done what their entire people could not. Word spread quickly through the ship. Messengers carried the news to every level, and soon the story was repeated among the soldiers, the engineers, and even the cooks. The human had soothed the child. Some doubted the tale, believing it was only rumor. Others rushed to see with their own eyes. By the next day, dozens stood in the corners of the throne chamber, watching quietly as Daniel continued to hold the child. They saw him humming softly, rocking the baby as if he had always belonged there. What they witnessed shook their understanding. The queen watched from her throne, her heart torn between relief and wonder. She had known her people would be shocked, yet even she had not expected the depth of their reaction. Some bowed their heads, acknowledging the miracle. Others whispered nervously, asking if this meant their traditions had failed. A few argued that it was dangerous to let an outsider so close to the heir. But every voice fell silent when the baby cooed gently in Daniel's arms. The sound of peace was stronger than their doubts. Later, when the chamber had quieted, the queen asked Daniel how he had done it. His answer was simple. He explained that children, no matter the world they came from, needed more than food or shelter. They needed to feel safe. They needed warmth and love. He told her how he had cared for his sister's children back on Earth, how he had learned that patience was the greatest gift for a crying child. His words were plain, yet they carried a truth deeper than all the wisdom in their records. The queen listened carefully. For her people, strength had always been measured in power and knowledge. They had built their lives on discipline and tradition. But here was a soldier, a prisoner, showing them that strength could also be found in tenderness. The thought unsettled some of her advisors, but it also opened their minds in ways they had never considered. In the days that followed, Daniel was brought to the throne chamber often. Each time, the child recognized his voice and calmed almost instantly. The bond between them grew stronger, a quiet bridge between two worlds. Servants began to greet him with respect. Guards who once looked at him as an enemy now stepped aside with a nod. Even the advisors who doubted him began to accept that his presence was necessary. The queen herself began to see Daniel differently. At first, he was only a tool of hope, someone who might help her child. But as she watched him, she saw more. He spoke with honesty, without seeking reward or power. He cared for the baby as if the child were his own family. His actions came not from duty, but from something deeper, something she began to realize was the essence of humanity. One evening, as Daniel rocked the child to sleep, the queen approached him. She looked at the peaceful face of her heir, then at the human holding him. "You have shown us something we did not know we lacked," she said softly. "You have shown us the strength of care." Daniel shook his head gently. "It isn't strength," he replied. "It's simply love. Anyone can give it, if they choose." His words stayed with her long after. The queen thought of the countless battles she had fought, the treaties she had made, the sacrifices she had endured. Yet this simple soldier spoke of love as if it were the most powerful force of all. Perhaps, she thought, he was right. As the flagship drifted across the stars, the bond between the human and the royal child became a story told in every hall. It was more than comfort, more than chance. It was proof that two species, once enemies, could find connection in the most unexpected way. The queen felt hope blooming in her heart, a hope not just for her child, but for the future of her people. And Daniel, though he never sought glory, was becoming more than a prisoner. He was becoming a symbol, a reminder that humanity's greatest strength was not in weapons or war, but in the quiet power of a caring heart. The flagship glided silently through the stars, carrying the echoes of a story that would be remembered for generations. The royal heir, once restless and crying endlessly, now slept peacefully in Daniel's arms. The human soldier had become more than a prisoner. He had become a bridge between two worlds, a symbol of the power of care and patience. The alien queen stood nearby, watching Daniel with a mix of awe and gratitude. She had seen many warriors, many diplomats, many leaders of her people, but none had shown her what he had. He had not fought with weapons or words. He had fought with gentleness, and that battle had been more important than any war. News of Daniel's act spread quickly through the ship. Soldiers, advisors, and workers came to see him, some in disbelief, others in quiet admiration. They had long considered humans as dangerous, unpredictable, and untrustworthy. Yet here was one human who had achieved what none of them could: he had calmed the royal heir. Many began to question their assumptions, realizing that perhaps humans were not only warriors but also beings capable of extraordinary care. The queen called a meeting with her council. "This human," she began, her voice steady and strong, "has shown us the value of patience, of compassion, of understanding. His actions have saved my child. They have opened our eyes to something greater than ourselves. Let him remain with us, not as a prisoner, but as a guest, and as a teacher." The council hesitated, as old traditions were hard to set aside. But the queen's will was absolute, and the evidence of his deeds spoke louder than any argument. One by one, the advisors nodded, some with reluctance, others with quiet acceptance. The decision was made: Daniel would stay on the ship as a trusted guest, no longer confined to a cell, no longer treated as a mere soldier. Daniel himself felt a mixture of surprise and humility. He had never expected reward, recognition, or honor. He had acted out of instinct, out of memory and love for children he had once known. And yet, now he realized that his simple actions had changed the course of history. He had shown that humans could bring more than conflict, they could bring peace. In the following days, Daniel spent time with the royal heir, rocking the child, teaching the queen's people how to comfort and care. Soldiers who had once trained only for combat now learned to observe, to understand, to listen. The baby's laughter began to fill the chambers, a sound so rare and joyful that even the queen's advisors paused their work to hear it. Every smile and giggle strengthened the bond between the species. The queen herself found new hope in her heart. For the first time, she imagined a future not dominated by fear, war, or distrust. She saw the possibility of peace between her people and humans. She realized that the strength of a ruler was not only in command or wisdom, but in the ability to recognize courage in unexpected places. Daniel had shown that courage could be gentle, quiet, and full of love. As the days turned into weeks, the flagship became a place of learning and understanding. Humans and aliens shared stories, shared meals, shared ideas. Old conflicts began to fade in the light of new friendship. And at the center of it all, the royal heir grew stronger, happier, and secure, cradled in the arms of both worlds' hope. One evening, Daniel looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing he had done what he could. The queen approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have changed more than my child," she said softly. "You have changed the hearts of my people, and perhaps even the future of our worlds." Daniel smiled gently. "I only did what anyone would do for a child," he replied. "Sometimes the smallest acts can create the biggest changes." The queen nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Outside the chamber, the stars stretched endlessly, a universe full of possibilities. Two worlds, once divided by fear and war, were now beginning to walk the first steps toward peace. And it all began with a crying child, a human soldier, and the courage to care. The flagship drifted on, carrying a story of hope, compassion, and the power of simple human kindness. And for the first time, the future felt bright for both humans and aliens, because the bond of care had rewritten destiny itself.